Welcome to Arable Weed Week.
We have planned a week-long series of events to shine a light on the latest weed management thinking and techniques.
Thank you to our sponsors, BASF, Bayer, Aminoa and Horsch, who have made the week possible.
We hope you'll join us for as many live sessions and activities as you can.
Here's a brief overview of what you can expect during the next week.
Hi, my name's Mike Green. I'm the Agricultural Sustainability Manager for BASF UK and Ireland. We're at Rawcliffe Bridge Farm here in Yorkshire, one of 5 farms that the Hinchliffe family farm have done for over 60 years now. We're here to join Agri Briefing on their Arable Weed Week, and you might think we'd be talking about weed control. Well, we will be later. But really we're trying to focus on the topic of IPM because it's coming up the agenda. It's more of an important topic to actually have and understand a little bit more about. So this year, next year, probably the next decade in fact. And I'm joined by a couple of experts in that field, I would say. I'm Rob Gladwin, who's the Head of Technical in BASF in the UK and Ireland. And I'm really pleased to say our great friend Phil Jarvis, Chairman of the VI, has stopped by to give us a few of his insights. So gentlemen, welcome. We're here to talk about IPM and have a little chat about that. It means lots to different people. I'm going to read you a definition if I can to set the scene on where we're going. So this is the European Union's Sustainable Use Directive definition. And it's something that's embedded in our UK law, so we will take that one forward. If I just read it, there's 2 bits to it. So they talk about integrated pest management. The pest piece is, most people just think about insects maybe, but actually under the SUD, it's weed, disease, insects and nematodes. So it's a really broad church of challenges. And their actual definition of IPM is integrated approach to the prevention and or suppression of organisms harmful to crop plants through the economically and ecologically justified use of all available information, tools and methods to deliver healthy crops and ecosystems. So, you know, it's anything and everything, but discuss. Where are we with that? Phil, you're our guest, please go.
Yeah, no, well, I think the first thing to mention is this is careful consideration of a number of approaches, many of which the farmers are already doing.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that we have to be very careful going forward is, you mentioned economics as well. We can be very aspirational about here, but businesses still have to thrive, produce food, look after the environment. So it's really key that when we're going forward, whatever we take from Europe or whatever we take in our own law, that we're very clear about this. I like to see a circular approach to all those things rather than a pinnacle where something is deemed better than the other. I don't know if you've got any comments on that, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, I think to follow up on that, Phil, I think there is a view that there's a hierarchy of points that you, or tools that you choose, and it isn't. We would also see it in a similar thing of it's a wheel and the spokes within that wheel. I think the other bit is probably, if you've not put everybody to sleep with the definition, Mike, I think the critical thing is most growers and agronomists today are doing it. Probably if we go back in time, not as vigorously and as critically as they are and should be doing today. And actually, it's more around actually exploring the elements that are within that in terms of what growers and agronomists are actually doing today, not what they were doing maybe 5-10 years ago.
So do you think people understand what IPM means?
Well, I think we could probably get lost in the definition itself. You've got IPM, you've got ICM, you've got IFM. I think we've even got integrated weed management, integrated disease management. But I think the critical bit is understanding that the IPM piece of this, the integrated pest management piece, as you say, is weeds, pests and diseases, or weeds, insects and diseases. But also the IPM piece is related to a site-specific situation or a field situation, not the farming operation overall, as IFM would be.
So you can start with a big landscape position, integrated landscape management, then down to your farm, then down to your crop. And integrated pest management very much is how you're going to deal with those challenges that are faced you to remember, grow food for us to sustain society and ourselves, but also very importantly, and this is the direction of travel, we've got some environmental challenges, climate change, biodiversity, carbon, all those things. And I think, the industry as well as farmers are going to have to address them. So some of the direction of play might not necessarily be business as usual, but it's adapting to that. It's going to be really important.
Because it's one of those things that I suppose getting a consistent message that people can buy in. I mean, there's always for some definitions, there appears to be an edge to it. It's a brand or it's a market, but actually my feeling is probably that we need something that people can recognise their own piece in it. I mean, you've been working in the industry for a long time and you'll have seen it. What bits of IPM do you think people really align to or identify with?
Well, I think some of the things that you mentioned, prevention and suppression. So things like rotation, things like resistant varieties, things like drainage, things like correct nutrient balances, all those sorts of things farmers have been doing for a number of years. And I think going forward, we can use things like technology, digital platforms to try and make us much better and much more efficient in that area. So, but prevention and suppression is a foundation which many farmers have, and the industry has based choices on from the word go, really.
And I think the industry needs to do that, certainly from a governmental perspective and also from a societal perspective, that prevention piece. I think there always has been a misconception that growers immediately always reach for the can, or an agronomist always reaches for the can as the first step in that process, and that's not the case. And we need to bring that prevention piece forward in terms of, yes, I've taken a choice on a rotation, I've taken a choice on the way I'm managing the soil, before they've even got to the crops even in the ground, before they're even saying, right, okay, in our case, which herbicide am I going to be applying for that particular grass weed?
But Mike, I'd just like to pick up on one of those other points as well about prevention and suppression. There's some things that we might do, or we think we do, but for example, cleaning our machinery down. If we don't transfer weeds around, then actually we put less pressure on, what we've got available and methods of controlling that. And also, suppressing using natural based solutions as well, so around crop pest predators as well, and that's something that sometimes doesn't always get the exposure. So that's something that's worth thinking.
So it's interesting you say about the machinery cleaning, and if we can think about sort of IPM weed control for the moment, just in that sort of context. What other cultural controls? I mean, obviously you were talking about people going to a herbicide to do an activity, a function, and then we've got all these other things for weed control. For me, it's thinking about in the round, which bits are dependent on each other, and actually they're probably dependent on everyone. So how do we see that balance for weed control going forward in an IPM context of products versus cultural? How does that look? So,
I mean, maybe obviously this last year had the battle in blackgrass, and I think there was a good examples where we were asking growers to flag what they were doing from a more cultural control aspect, and that brought lots of things that growers were doing. Some of the things that Phil mentioned, the machinery cleaning bit, but it's around the drilling date, the attention to detail with the soil, the cultivation techniques they're using, drilling date, variety,
hand
seed
roguing
rate,
weeds,
and it's all. There isn't one blueprint. That was the other thing that was very clear with that. It's for a particular field, a grower needs to decide what are the best, or the agronomist has to decide what are the best cultural techniques to employ. I mean, a good one for blackgrass control has always been delay drilling, which is a very effective tool. But if you get to the 16th of October and you're on heavy land and it's starting to rain, do you hold off or do you drill? And I think those are the trade-offs that growers and agronomists sometimes have to do, is say, well, actually, to drill the week earlier to get the crop in, you maybe need to be thinking about some of the other things that you're doing around that.
I like the battle for blackgrass. It sounds like it should have a historical date, because
yes,
it is a big challenge. I mean, I've got my own war plan for it, so it's got variety, soil health, nutrition, drilling date, all those things, and actually there's very little of it in that first iteration that relies on plant protection product. Because when I do want to use it and I want to dip into the tools, I want to make sure it's really effective on what.
I was going to say that's the bit about, modes of action, new modes of action, just using it. Some people think they could maybe just do all cultural, or just do product. And it is this integration of it. So to realise the potential of using a product, a herbicide product, new product, whatever, you have to have all the other bits lined up.
Yeah, I mean, for example, if you look at a tiered approach to it, where you say, well, actually, if you use cultural approach, it's always better than perhaps a plant protection approach. But I mean, if you continually cultivate the soil and you continually put heavy machinery on it, and you make a very fine seedbed and your soil runs off, then actually that isn't particularly beneficial. A lot of people say, well, biologicals will be the answer as well. Well, we have to be very careful about what we release when we have to do it based on science, one thing or another. And then when we come to perhaps using plant protection products, if we make those decisions based on the best information, we can decide which is the most appropriate. And I think that's where we've got to be much more measured in our approach.
I mean, I think people as well are, it's raining here today. If you think about this, the rain that's in the autumn that we have, and people are trapped in certain systems in some ways. I mean, it takes a lot of energy and confidence to move out of a system. But actually, the government's also looking at the systems we use and then pressure on that sort of thing. I mean, do our systems, are they fit for purpose at the moment for delivering sort of this IPM strategy for cropping, weed control, disease control, that sort of thing? Do you think we've got enough tools in our toolbox?
Do you want me to start? Well, yeah.
No, Rob. I'll ask Rob on that one.
Because he was struggling.
He was about ready to go, yeah.
I mean, I think there's more tools we can add. I mean, we've not touched digital at all in this discussion. We're probably 5 or 10 minutes into it. So actually, yeah, there's a lot of technology coming there in terms of weed mapping, particularly on understanding the dynamics of weed populations. I think we're learning even more around, I think, the nutrition status and soil health status having a big impact on the way the weeds behave and populations behave within the soil. So I think there's still things we don't know.
Yeah, and I think going forward as well, for example, the solution to this may well be some form of government support to take farmers on a journey, but it'll also be about farmers getting more efficient. It'll also be about a reward in the marketplace as well, so our trading arrangements. So all those things will impact on how farmers make decisions to grow their food. I think going forward though as well, if we've got to address environmental issues, then the way we go about it is going to be a combination of a number of different things on farm. So using digital and technology and using plant protection, chemistry, but I think going back to fundamentals of farmers and producing food, looking after your soil, the ability to hold water, the ability to make sure the right nutrition's there is going to be really key as well.
And I think the for me as well, in the background is this bit about demand. We've got land use is one of the big things that we've got to deal with as a country, based on exporting and importing, and there are lots of other demands as well. So clean, affordable food, nutritionally strong, grown on, if you like, not the least amount of land, but the amount of land that we need. And you need plant protection, but you also need cultural in that. But society's demanding, I don't know, I'm not saying in excess, but we are an increasing population, and at the moment we do consume quite a lot. So how does that fit in? How does IPM relate to still producing that?
Well, I mean, we were talking earlier on about, a lot of people said, well, in the 70s it was this. Well, from the 1970s now, there's 12 million more people in the United Kingdom. So there's a tremendous amount of pressure on that land to produce food and produce those ecosystem services as well. So I think getting smarter at it, and also the right crop in the right place, the right tree in the right place. If you've got really productive areas of the country providing a lot of our food, then we should do our best to try and make sure they continue to be so. With perhaps, we'll still need some environmental control around there, but perhaps there are other areas of the country that might be more appropriate.
Yeah, so we can't have everything in everywhere, is what you're saying, potentially.
Not unless, of course, we wanted to talk about the big picture, which is how do you stop population growing so you don't overexploit your planet, which even with Rob here is going to be a difficult subject to solve.
So we've been talking in the round about IPM, thinking about definitions, the higher level piece, how government might be looking at us. But what are we actually doing, if you like, as an industry, as manufacturers, as farming industry, farmers? What techniques are we already doing that we need to get better recognised? Do you think we need to get better recognised? How do we tell the story?
Well, I'll let Rob talk about the industry side of it. But if we look at government and they're talking about IPM, in their transition away, having left Europe and in having our own rules and regulations. So they talk IPM, so it's mentioned a lot of times. The AHDB, for example, at their last agronomist conference had a whole day, the very first day, on IPM. So they're informing more agronomists about how we take this approach forward. Things like the voluntary initiative, which is a facilitating fund to encourage best practice for IPM, looking after water, wildlife, measuring how we measure metrics in the future. So there is a lot already going on, and it's making sure that everybody recognises that. Now, for the industry, Rob, there's a part for the industry to play, because a lot of these solutions to the problems are going to come from the industry as well.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of, Phil's already mentioned the HDB work in terms of outreach to agronomists and growers, and obviously there's the network of agronomists that are out on farm on a day-to-day basis, whether they're distributor advised or a AICC agronomists that are out there who are pursuing the IPM cultural control measures we've been talking and we've touched on, and our real worked examples in the field.
But it's interesting, I asked the question, maybe I didn't ask it correctly, but you've come up with a high level bit. I mean, I think it's really important for the audience listening to recognise some of the things that they're doing. And if you look at the Sustainable Use Directive and what it states is IPM, there's a list of about 35 things, and they're even like RTK, or everyone thinks of varietal resistance, but precision application of inputs is actually an IPM technique, because you're only putting on what's needed. So how would a farmer, so I'll rephrase the question again, if each of you could come up with 3 or 4 things that farmers are doing that you think are IPM, that they would recognise, leaving this this sort of podcast and just saying, actually, do you know, I recognise I'm doing IPM.
Well, I think soil or cultivation and cultivation techniques, so whether they're ploughing, min-tilling, regen ag, whatever terms that you want to put on that, the cultural techniques from a cultivation perspective that they're employing, that's IPM. The use of roguing at the end of the season to do that final, what I would argue is the attention to detail related particularly to grass weed control, specifically blackgrass, but I think growers are probably more aligned with that for wild oat control probably than they were blackgrass, but we know that there are growers doing that aspect. So again, that for me is IPM. Variety, the choice of variety, seed rate, but also the growth habit of that variety, and does it have a suppression technique on, or a suppression growth habit.
So something like a hybrid barley or something like,
exactly.
Or so would help you. I would pick on planning for rotations and varieties, orange blossom midge resistance, for example. And then monitoring and thresholds as well. So every time your agronomist goes in the field with the farmer and looks at his crop, he's making the decision, and much of that is taken for granted that, and sometimes it's not recorded, but he'll make a decision out in the field, and a lot of that is IPM. Yeah,
I'd go with that. So how would something like use of the appropriate dose, that kind of thing, would you see that as an IPM technique?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and of course remember that we're trying to make sure that we don't end up with resistance to things as well. So we've got to be very careful about how we develop strategies that say, we'll use less and less. So if we can use a lot of things, cultural things, that mean when we do use a product, we can use it so we actually get on top of it, then we'll discourage resistance, and that's a key point as well.
Okay, so we've dealt with that sort of identification for farmers. Now, what's the vehicle or the mechanism for communicating this to them? How do we get farmers to think about their baseline and where they are, and then actually perhaps record what's going on? I know in the VI you've got your checklist, and you come up with a score. Do you want to describe that?
Yeah, well, I think, and this is a good point to bring in the new integrated pest management plan, which gives farmers a score of where they are on their IPM journey. So within the 20 odd questions in there, now 6 of them are scored, and this was developed with Henry Creason from Scottish rural colleges, I think. And it's basically, when you answer those questions, you can see where you are on that IPM journey. And that's quite important for farmers, because before there hasn't really been a measure or a metric for that. So I would encourage people to make sure that they look at this new plan and do it and see where they are on the journey, because that will then lead to being able to improve.
Go on, Rob.
And I think, to build on that, there are groups that are benchmarking as well, and I think that's quite an important point to say you've got to understand where you are to go on the journey, because some will be adopting elements of IPM, which they identify as IPM to varying degrees.
Yeah, okay. So we've got, I mean, again, mode of action in weed control, but also in disease control as well. The variety, the differentness of it is really important in the system. And obviously we've new chemistry coming along. So how, again, you know, people might say, well, it's, you know, why do we need something else? I think it's this evolution of performance in the field. I mean, you mentioned about how much, you know, growing more from the same area or growing more from less area, we need this level of performance. How do we communicate that to people outside of within the industry? Probably quite easy, but outside the industry as well, the need to have new products coming forward.
Well, I think when we talk about monitoring and threshold, you talked about mode of action as well. And actually, if you plan your rotations and you plan your plant protection products, you end up with things with different modes of action, which make it very difficult things to get on top of and cause resistance. And then if you add into that, say, another IPM technique, which may well be add some grass into your rotation, maybe some livestock. You know, for example, I asked someone about resistance to products, and they said, well, it's very difficult to be resistant to being eaten. So of course, if that makes, you know, if a sheep or a cow eats something or a weed, then when it comes back into the rotation, it means that you've got less for your plant protection products to do. That would be a sort of balanced IPM approach.
I mean, I think for the crop protection piece, obviously with the renewals process for AIs, we've seen the numbers of active ingredients available to growers decline across all crops, and so I think that's why the IPM piece has come more into focus in terms of the cultural control. There is new chemistry coming through. We're a business which is innovating in that area, and we will bring forward new tools, but they need to be used within an IPM based environment. And you know, surprisingly, probably from a crop protection manufacturer, I would say if you're not doing some of the cultural controls, actually don't use our products, because you will not actually get the best out of those products. They need to be built on top of a solid IPM or cultural control platform, because you will then get better performance out of the crop protection product that you're using, particularly blackgrass control, but also for septoria control.
And that's particularly important for growers, you know, when we're talking about financial margins as well. You know, going forward, the financial margin of performance for growers is really important to their business. Yeah. So using all these techniques means that, you know, that performance is better, their business is more sustainable.
And I think that, for me, is also part of the message back to government and other NGOs who are looking at the industry going, perhaps we need to slim it down to grow less. But I mean, you export. If you don't change the demand, which you mentioned earlier, you actually export a lot of the environmental consequences of reducing food input. I mean, I agree. The food in the right place, trees in the right place, environment, we're trying to get that balance, but maybe we're over, you know, we haven't got enough land to do it all. So maybe our gift is to actually be more efficient, and therefore we need this combination of things. So how do we communicate that to people? Is it face to face? Is it articles like this? Is it listening to it? Is it seeing it in practice? What do you think the mechanisms? Because government will ask us to do that, I'm sure.
Well, I think the industry is well placed to deliver that message. You know, whether that's the NFU, we've got the VI activities, which is more focused on the industry itself. But there are vehicles to deliver that message, and the industry should do that. You know, we're here at Rawcliffe today. You know, the land outside here has the potential to deliver 12, 13 tonne a hectare of wheat quite easily if the environmental conditions are right. Isn't it right that actually is producing wheat? If there's another area of the country which is struggling to get wheat established in the autumn, heavier soil type, isn't suited for production, then yes, we should look at other uses for that land. But for me, this is the trade-offs, and in BSF we talk a lot about finding the right balance. This is a very good example of where you need to find the right balance between what we want in terms of production, but also what we want in terms of the environment. And society overall has certain demands it's making of agriculture. They want respect for the environment. They want to understand where their food comes from as well. But they also want food at a price they're willing to pay in the supermarket. So it's finding that balance.
I was going to say, I think it's really good as well with Arable Weed Week, with Agri Briefing, that we've been able to share, perhaps mixing it around a bit with IPM at the high level, but also saying, guys, farming, you're doing a lot of this anyway, and it's trying to give people that encouragement to to say that they're doing it. Now we've got to find maybe more mechanisms to help them record it and to demonstrate where they are and how they're moving forward, because I'm sure people will be asking. It's not about getting paid by someone to do that. It's, you know, a lot of them are just doing it anyway. It's good practice. And we talked about profit earlier, and actually businesses need to make profit to reinvest. I mean, that's the way it goes. And if we just want to offshore everything, then the landscape will change. So I think that's really important.
I mean, Mike, maybe on one of those points, I think growers tend and agronomists tend to write down when they make an intervention. I think we would firmly believe as a business, actually, you should also be writing down when you don't make an intervention. Now, most growers will probably roll their eyes at that and go, well, I just do that. But consumers and government don't know that. They don't know that you've not done something. Actually, you should record it, and particularly through environmental land management in the future, if they are talking about payments to growers, you know, public money for public goods, and that is one aspect, and I think, Phil, there is talk that that's going to be there, then actually there's going to be potentially, if you like, to a point, a financial incentive for writing that down. Because if you're doing those things...
And some more clarity from government. Well, and I think the point about IPM and us focusing on in the industry is, you know, we're going to be producing food under a system that champions IPM, and that's where we should be buying our food from.
So we've talked in some detail at quite a high level about IPM, and maybe it's a new introduction for people. So for farmers and growers listening to this and trying to recognise what they do, and am I doing IPM and everything, can we have from each of you the three top things that you know are IPM that perhaps you want to share with growers and say, guys, actually this is what IPM means. So Phil, for you first.
Well, I'd go to crop monitoring as well in the field. So every time your agronomist goes out in the field with you and you make decisions based on that. Your variety is very important as well. But not just what's in the farm office, what goes on in the farmyard as well. So, you know, how you fill your sprayer up, what nozzles you use, you know, what the wind's like and the weather's like. They're really important because, you know, from the top down into the office, down to the operator, it's really, this is a team effort as well, and you know, sometimes we forget about the operators who are doing things, a really important part of the discussion around IPM.
But you said monitoring, just before you go on to your next one.
Yeah.
Do you mean just monitoring to do something, or do you mean something else?
Well, I think recording lots of decision making, lots of your decisions is really important. You know, whether there's another solution, if you monitor it, you can manage it, and I think that's really important.
Okay, so actually when you're monitoring and then not doing something is also IPM?
Yeah, it is, because obviously there may well be a number of circumstances or conditions that mean you don't have to do anything. We take it for granted as farmers, often that's the case, but perhaps people need to see us doing that as well, so they realise how much, you know, farmers make thousands of decisions in a year, and then sometimes we'll make scores of them in a day, and we don't record them all, but perhaps we can get better at that.
Rob, have you got one?
Yeah, I mean, Mike, as you know, we've talked about a lot of this as a business, and we would be firmly of the belief that actually it's recording those where you don't make an intervention. As we've already said, where you make an intervention, and if it's a crop protection product, you record that. But you don't tend to do it when you don't, and I think we would say that.
Well, we've got to be very careful that we don't overburden the farmer with lots and lots of record keeping.
But I think he's already doing a lot of that anyway, and as you say, he's making those numbers of decisions probably on a daily basis. But I think it's getting it into a process where it's just part of that general recording.
So Phil's got one question out the way. You've piggybacked his. You've got your own first question to go for.
I mean, Phil touched on the variety piece and mentioned hybrid barley earlier on. I think that's a critical area in terms of picking the variety that's right for the situation. And if we're looking at grass weed control, the ability or the growth habit of that variety, again, the selection of that variety for me will be an IPM decision. Cultivation, the type of cultivation that you're actually doing. So are you ploughing, are you min-tilling, are you no-tilling, and are you then also using different techniques to establish the crop? They're all IPM decisions from my perspective.
Okay, so you're in the lead with two. Phil, you got your second one?
I think looking after your soil health, nutrition is really key. You know, water storage, you know, it's raining now.
Yeah.
I think that's really key, because I think if you get the balance in your soil right, then a lot of other things follow onto it. So, you know, soil monitoring really key.
Okay.
And maybe, Mike, to piggyback on the back of that, we talk about soil management. I think one of the areas we're focusing on very much is about drainage. and actually making sure the drains in the field are actually flowing.
Yeah, working properly.
But you know, we can be smart with drainage. You know, we can have smart drainage which drains into perhaps a pond next to it, or so we don't have to increase issues elsewhere with water flow.
That is one thing about drainage that certainly some people are worried about: too much water leaving the fields and then causing a problem downstream.
Yeah, create a wildlife pond, habitat. There's lots of ways of addressing it.
And I know some companies are also storing that water as well, so they're looking for that in a dry period to bring that back in. So that's to me again, it's a part of, and as we said earlier, IPM is this integrated approach around everything. So it's a little piece helping here, that kind of thing together.
But this rain that's falling now, what we want it to do is we want it to stay in our soil as long as possible, because no doubt in 3 or 4 weeks' time everyone will say we want some more rain. So if we can hold it in our soil and only release it when it's at capacity, better structure, then that's part of that integrated approach as well.
So final thing, have you got a final third one? Do you want me to help you out? Cover crops, grazing, something like that? Precision application?
Yeah, I think we talked about the golden hoof in the past as well, in terms of the role animals and livestock can play. I mean, there are situations where livestock isn't always the solution because of the way the farming operations set up, but there may be ability to even, if you like, rent livestock in, which might not be part of the overall farm system or part of the farm business.
Yeah, no, I think certainly for cereal farms, increasing organic matter is really important as well. There's lots of benefits for it. And then, we touched earlier on about mode of action, different modes of action. Link that with your chemical and biological processes. You've got a winning formula.
Okay. So out of that, we've got 6 things that farmers are probably doing now, maybe about to do. They all IPM. We need a mechanism to record them so that they can be valued and recognised. So,
and I think the critical bit maybe to finish is they're both good from an economic perspective, and they're also good from an environmental perspective.
Okay.
A win-win.
Win-win. So we're here at the end of the session on IPM. I think we've covered a lot of ground. We've exposed some of the things, actually a lot of the things that farmers and growers are already doing that are IPM, and actually they probably recognise them now, so that's really an important place. We've covered how it might fit in the political framework as well, and opportunities going forward, and how it fits in with a range of opportunity, cultural and chemical control that we're doing. So it's been a great session. Thank you very much, Phil, for taking the time to see us, and Rob as well. And now we're over to take some questions.
Hello.
Morning.
We are live. Just a big thank you to everybody who has who's been watching this morning on this very sunny morning, and thank you to everybody whose questions have already come through. There are still a chance to ask more questions. First, just some introductions. So my name is Ali Richards, and I am the campaign manager for cereal herbicides for BASF, and I am joined here by nearly 3 guests. We think there might be somebody trying to join having technical issues, as is always the case with these things. There's always one. But yeah, I really want to take the time to introduce Phil Jarvis, who you saw on that film. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Phil, and also Rob Gladwin as well. Do you two want to just take some time to introduce yourself, a little bit about what you do, and then we can kind of wait for Mike, or then start asking the questions that have come through. So Phil, over to you.
As you saw from the video, I'm the chair of the voluntary initiative, but my job is the head of farming at the Allerton project, a farm in Leicestershire, demonstration farm in Leicestershire, predominantly heavy clay winter cereals most of the time. A lot of spring cereals the last couple of years.
Thanks, Phil. And you, Rob?
Morning, Rob Gladwin. I'm head of technical for BASF in the UK and Ireland. It's quite a diverse role, covers a range of activities from our advocacy activities with politicians and stakeholders, stewardship right through to the technical development of our products in the field from a biological perspective for registration.
Great, thank you, Rob. Now, I think we are going to be joined by Mike Green, who you would have also seen on that webinar this morning, who is the sustainability manager for BASF. But actually, Rob, Phil, we might be able to get a word in edgeways if he
let's get on with it.
he calls us for 5 minutes. We can get some questions in. So we've got some great questions on the line from those that are listening. So I'm just going to go through the top and kind of go through those. So a question from Joe Clint. So how practical is it to pack the water from field drains? Is this something that would be easy to implement?
Shall I start, Rob, on that?
Yeah.
I think this is where things like integrated water plans, working with local authorities, working with the Environment Agency, working with government, and about investment in infrastructure as well. We talked briefly on the video about smart drainage, so potentially, grants for farmers to have their own reservoirs, which not only act as a water source for perhaps crops, but also around that area can be quite good for wildlife as well. And they don't add to the burden, and they're like a balancing pond in some respects, so we're not just draining straight into watercourses. So that's the way I see it, but it needs to have a lot of people thinking together to make it happen rather than individuals.
Yeah, so it's practical, but definitely work involved in making it happen.
Sorry, Ali, I'm not getting your sound.
Oh dear, is this any better?
Yeah, a bit.
A little bit, okay. So
there we go.
I'll just lean forward, shall I?
Yeah, nice and practical.
So Phil, so it is practical, but a bit of work involved and a bit of teamwork involved in making it happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think because remember, this is not just about a farming issue per se for the farmer, but this is about ensuring reliable, continuity of supply, and it's good for society as well. So that's why we should all be invested in making a solution. And there's great opportunity for farmers as well to provide some of that public good as well.
Yeah, great. So this is a question that's actually got 3 votes on it, so quite popular, the most popular question that we've had through this morning. So measuring the unmeasurable, how do we quantify IPM without overburdening the grower with paperwork? Surely this info needs to be collected through on-farm software.
Yes, Ali, maybe take that. So, and I think there was also one from Andrew as well along a similar vein. Yeah, absolutely. We don't want to. It isn't about overloading growers and agronomists with paperwork. I think the use of the on-farm software would be a really good vehicle for this. I mean, some of the information is already going in anyway, and it's probably more about how you're extracting that. So you can actually get at that information to give yourself like an IPM score if that's what we wanted to do in the future. And I hope that government will try to tap into some of that, and growers have the ability to use that information and get potentially rewarded in some way for that where they're recording it. I mean, there are some things which are not recorded today, as we talked about in the video. As growers, take thousands of decisions a year. By the way, I'm not proposing that we record all those thousands of individual decisions, but certainly the main ones which are having a significant impact from a positive perspective are recorded, because the industry needs to demonstrate that to consumers and to government. Why shouldn't they if they're doing it?
Yeah, so I think, I know, Rob, that, we've talked about, apps that might be able to do this, but I think and obviously in cropping software, I think there's smart ways of doing it as well. For example, if you click a variety, it might give you all the things that are good at IPM that might come automatically. So a decision you make about something, the other things just appear on the screen straight away. That's already been done. The algorithms work that out. And I think, it is important, because if that's what, if we're saying that's what the consumer is demanding and that's what we should be doing as responsible growers, we do just have to bear in mind that if we're placing this way of farming and recording on our own UK growers, then, it's very poignant today when we have new trade deals with Australia. We need to make sure that there's some sort of clarity in where we're buying our food from and what's important to us as a nation. if we're asking one set of growers to do one thing and actually we might be asking another somewhere else. So I think just to make it clear that if we want to do IPM, this is not just about IPM in the UK and the challenges that we face here. This is a global issue. So we should be addressing global issues, and everybody should be addressing IPM approaches and perhaps looking after our climate in the big picture.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and thank you, Phil. We've got some more questions on the line. Keep them coming, guys. We're here till 9 a.m. I nearly said 9 p.m. then. That would be quite long for everybody, I think. A question from Teresa. So, the issue of soil nutrition status was mentioned in the context of IPM and weed control. Could the panel comment on this further?
Yeah, I think soil nutrition status is, if there's an imbalance in things, then other things thrive in it. So whether it be pH, or whether it be a different status thing, some things thrive on it, some pathogens thrive on it, some things don't grow properly, so then it allows thin crops occur, and then other things can come in. So getting that status right in your soil and testing your soil, testing your organic matter, lays a good foundation. Then there's nothing better than a healthy crop growing to fight off pests and diseases. So if your soil's in good status, good nutritional status, it's likely that your plant's going to be able to maximize that, which means it's likely that it's going to have much more competition and be able to ward off some of those other things that might attack it.
Great, thank you. A really interesting question that's come through as well. So how about small robots as part of IPM? We can pick which weeds we leave for ecological and visual reasons, and which we have zero tolerance for, brome in our case. Hopefully they will be here in the autumn. We will be paying per hectare, so it is good for a small farm too. So yeah, great question. What are the practicalities of that for larger farms and those with higher weed pressures? Really interesting area, really interesting question.
Yeah, so maybe on the
talking about small robots. Yeah, sorry.
It's all right. Go on, Phil.
No. Rob, you fire away.
No, I was just going to say that. Yeah, I don't see a problem with that, and obviously that's a plug for the small robot company there. Well done to that individual. But obviously there are other companies available as well. But yeah, I think it demonstrates the technology that's coming in here from a digital perspective, whether that technology can be used across a range of farms, whether that's the smaller farms or the larger farms. So yeah, absolutely. And we talked about it in the video in terms of the role digital will play in that, in terms of in the case of the small robot, picking those weeds out if that's practical, right through to weed mapping and understanding where they are in the field as well, and their ecological and an economic value.
No, yeah, I mean, talking about small robots, we should really expand this to satellite and drone technology as well. So it's a much wider picture, and I think there's a certain role some of those technologies can play a real important part of how we get more efficient, how we implement IPM. Often there's things that they can't do. So actually, the role of small robots in the field is, if you've already scanned it with a satellite or a drone and you actually need to go and look at some of those areas, send the small robots in to do the soil sampling and to do the weed analysis. That seems to be pretty good. I mean, there's obviously there's driverless things that are appearing all the time. So this technology is going to be advancing over the future.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Welcome, Mike. I'm just at the opportune moment, as we've got some great questions, I think, that directly for you and with your experience. So Simon Taylor asked a question, how do we make customers, supermarkets, aware of IPM? So in potatoes, there are PCN resistant varieties and blight resistant varieties, but supermarkets are often slow to put these on the list. We don't want to grow things we can't sell.
Yeah, good morning everyone, and apologies for the technological problem. Can I have a thumbs up? You can hear me. Thank you, and everyone else thumbs up. Yeah, it's like all these things. There are a lot of other pieces of the jigsaw that we know are good to do, but there's no market value, or people don't recognize the value for them at the moment. So I think the thing with IPM is it's because we're all doing it, but we're not actually describing it very well. People don't see it and don't actually know what value it has. They want us to do it. Now, if you think about the renewable energy side, you couldn't buy renewable energy 10 or 15 years ago, or you could at a really high premium, but now it's everywhere. You can't actually get non-renewable energy. So that's a market driven, that's a consumer wanting that. Now, again, IPM, if we can make IPM a place where the consumer understands it is the way that farmers manage, and say everyone on the call is doing it, most people are doing a really good job. We just need to show them that that's what we're doing. And I don't know that, say, sometimes with supermarkets and that value chain, it's about scale as well. They need, repeatable volumes over a long period, which sometimes these things don't come in.
Ali, I think it's worth saying, you talk about the PCN resistant variety or the blight resistant variety and their willingness or not to put that on the shelf. I mean, obviously, what the consumer is buying in terms of the usability of that particular variety for the use that's intended when it gets to the home is important. And again, this is where there are some trade-offs here, that if you want a certain variety because it's got a certain use, then that should then be taken into consideration in terms of the overall approach. And it's finding this right balance, because you can drive down and say, well, yes, we're going to have PCN resistant varieties, but if they don't do what you want them to do in the home or for the end user, then actually they'll not buy them anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that, that's why we should champion things like the leaf mark. That's why we should champion the ICM elements of red tractor. That's why we should, conservation grade would be another one. There are other assurance schemes that give you the confidence that British growers are looking at IPM as part of their day-to-day management. I mean, and initiatives like the voluntary initiative, for example, mainly talking to the industry and facilitating the industry about how we move forward. We still need to probably get some messages into government and into the wider public about championing those decision-making, about a balanced approach to how we produce our food. So, supermarkets, often it can be price-driven, but, a lot of people would want secure, affordable, nutritious, well-produced, in an environment that's fit for producing that food. So, there's lots of things to bear in mind. I'm not sure we'll quite solve it before 9 o'clock, but we'll have a good go.
Yeah, and just on that answer, Phil, actually, I think you answered Steve Crayston's question, which is, does the industry really think that the consumer is more worried about where and how the food is grown, or actually more worried about how much it costs?
Well, there have been quite a lot of surveys, haven't there, of people, what they want going into a supermarket and then what comes out in the basket afterwards. And I mean, in the situation we are globally and in this country, people aren't going to be under pressure, I think, for how much they spend. Yeah, and it's about branding as well, just making people more aware of how we grow stuff. I mean, there's niches everywhere, and that's fine. That's what they do. But majority of us are growing sort of broad acre crops that go into a commodity place, and then they just get used up, and the consumer gets them. But so an IPM would actually be a way of describing how we farm, and the controls that we do, and actually the space that we do create for nature on farms, things like that. So. But again, how much they'd be prepared to pay, Phil's mentioned all sorts of other brandings and sort of tags and stuff. And yeah, I mean, some people pay for those, others aren't in a place to.
Yeah. I think Ali, I think the consumer needs choice. Those that want to pay additional because they feel that's what they want to do, or actually in some cases is buying into a lifestyle thing. That's absolutely fine. But I would say there's a vast majority of consumers just want to ensure that they can go to the supermarket, buy the food at the price they're willing or able. In some cases, this isn't willing; it's actually able to pay. And I think sometimes the debate gets dominated by the niche markets where people have the ability to pay. Some consumers do not have a lot of spare cash, and any increase in price of food disadvantages them massively. And we've seen the discussion on food poverty. And again, it's another one we can talk. We're not going to sort that out before 9 o'clock, but these are real issues, and consumers, and it doesn't mean that they shouldn't have respect for the environment and those kind of things, but they need to be assured. And I think Red Tractor is a good example of this, that the produce, if it's marked with that label or that logo, that they can buy that with confidence, knowing that it's taking respect for the environment, but bringing them a produce at the price they're able to pay. Why not?
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, there are different production systems and support all around the world, from food vouchers to transport to storage in different countries. Some people have economies of scale. They have rules on animal welfare and labour. But I think ultimately it's interesting. A lot of the trade talks that have gone on recently about trade. The point seems to be that we'll get some cheaper food to the consumer, but at what cost? And it seems to me that in those talks we don't have any talk about welfare, environmental standards in those countries. And don't get me wrong, some of them are fantastically produced food, but we need to have a wider discussion on that. And we really need to, that's why this public money for public goods, if we want to support that and the market isn't there to reward it, then that's probably why government can get into support. And Rob's point is a good point, well made there, about producing food at all price points as well. So, within this global trade community or within our own country, we need to be able to supply food at all price points for the consumer.
Yeah, good point.
Well, ultimately, it's down to calories, though, isn't it? We don't live on price. We live on calories consumed. And some people can't afford 600 calories. So it doesn't matter whether they're organic, regenerative, something. At the end of the day, they're looking for calories to survive. So that's where a lot of our broadacre stuff. But our gift is to actually make sure that we describe IPM, because we're all doing it. And when you think about the number, and we said in the clip, there's over 30 definitions of things that go towards it, and we need to describe that, because that's how tight and good our system is.
Yeah.
I think that's the important bit. We're not being slack. We're just not showing people really what we do.
Yeah. A change of tack, we've got about 8 minutes left. A change of tack a little bit away from the consumer and then kind of back to the farmer. Great question from Hazel Doonan, who's asked us, so measuring IPM should consider that what is right on one farm isn't necessarily right for another farm, depending on soil type of weeds. So the scoring system should take the absolute farm potential into account. I think that's really interesting. So different IPM approaches for different farms. How do we communicate that?
It's interesting what you mean, Hazel, about absolute farm potential. I mean, there would be every farm should do everything, but it wouldn't be appropriate. But IPM is about selecting things for the toolbox. So we control, you've got product, you've got cultural, you've got all those other bits and pieces, cultural rotations and all this sort of stuff. So you pick what fits your farm. Yeah, and it's not a case of, well, I've picked those 7, or how am I going to fit those other 5 in? That's not the way it goes. That would make you unprofitable, and you need to be profitable to stay in business, to reinvest. So I think it would be a case of, you just record what you're doing, and if you've got a list of 35 that you're picking from, pick 7, pick 8, pick 10, whatever. You're then demonstrating IPM. It's not all of it.
Yeah.
No one could do all of it and stay profitable.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite important, Ali, particularly if we're talking about the way government may be trying to think about this. And we have seen ham-fisted approaches at different initiatives in the past, where they try to have one sort of blueprint for everyone, and that actually creates other problems. So I think it needs to be flexible, and I would agree with Hazel. Yeah, it needs to be appropriate to the farmers. As Mike said, there is no one. You must do all 35. You'd have growers pulling their hair out with that. That just does not work. We know that.
And also, Rob, Ali, this is why having good advisors across the landscape who deal in different areas, different crops, and have some expertise in those areas is really important. Regional trials, that's why they're really good as well, because they show the climatic conditions, possibly the soil type. Local discussion groups as well, they'll be saying what's good on their area. And I think this is where things like AXD boom monitor farms and strategic farms are really useful as well, because even more and more of this IPM discussion is coming into those farms, and that's a great place for farmers to turn up and see something in action as well. So I think it's a point well made. You know, there's a couple of final points I'd say. You know, farm clusters and facilitation, joining together with groups of farmers is really good for this. And the government is looking at landscape recovery as well as local and joining up things. So, you know, there are some things on the horizon which we can't have a blanket approach that just says this is the IPM plan and you've just got to stick to it.
And I would say it's almost, it's got the feeling like we're in defense mode here, and we shouldn't be. Yeah, no, and this is the thing, that actually the stuff that we grow on farm, all of you, you know, listening and advising or whatever on farm, we're not going to do techniques and bring in IPM solutions that actually don't make it work. You know, the Teresia's asked another question about weedier crops, and as weeds change, yeah, the whole system will evolve. And actually all we're trying to say is this is how we farm, and actually it has these positive values, and it has these levels of control, and it has these things that contribute towards you know, the economy, the environment, and to give social value as well. They all do that. Yeah,
so,
and I
just on that, so I'm sure the organisers of Arable Weed Week are tearing their hair out at us at the moment, because we've spoken just about kind of IPM in a broader sense. That is on purpose. We will go on. There's webinars throughout the day.
Yeah.
Talk about specifically weed management. We just thought this was a really important topic to set the scene, because cereal herbicides do tend to bear a lot of the brunt with society. So just on Teresa's question, if we could just end on that. So the question Mike alluded to, for those that maybe can't see it on the screen, which is, will an IPM approach see us accepting weedier crops? And if so, do we know enough about the biology of individual weeds, particularly if the weed spectrum may start to change as a result of climate change? This might be a question for our for later on. Actually, would be great to explore with some of our herbicide experts, but I'm sure Phil, Rob, Mike, you've all got something to say on this particular question around weedier crops.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, in principle, you can accept weedier crops. I think, as you say, Teresa, it's understanding the biology of those. There are certain weeds that you've got a low tolerance to, blackgrass being one, but brome, wild oats, ryegrass, which are highly competitive. And so I think already that indicates we already know in a lot of cases the biology, the behaviour and the impact that they have. It's probably digging that information out, and probably somewhere on the HDB site there probably is that information, right from the grass weeds that you can't tolerate right through to maybe speedwells or populations of certain weeds which you can tolerate at a level. But again, if the population gets too high, then that again, you may have to take an intervention approach to control that. So in principle, yes, but it has to be done with the biology it taken into account. The other bit about climate change, yeah, it's going to impact the way weeds are behaving, certainly population dynamics, but also emergence patterns potentially. And I would say even without climate change, I think you can see changes in the biology, certainly of blackgrass, particularly if you shift into more spring rotations. If you're then not taking, again, the right IPM approaches related to that, and you're slipping down a similar road, actually the population can change and you can end up with more spring germinating blackgrass than you've had in the rotation historically. So just saying, oh, well, you'll switch from winter to spring, weeds adapt. They're quite adaptable.
I think it depends also the crop, Rob. Some crops will be broadleaf weeds.
Yeah.
And I don't think accepting them is quite the right way to look at it. I mean, you know, why would you have a weed that's going to reduce your profit and give you rotational problems? So you would actually look at the weed and manage them according to what they are. And if you have things that can escape that don't impact, but then you've got areas around the field that you can do for the weed biology. Phil, you're very quiet.
Well, I know that Ali will want to wrap up. So I said, you know, this is about resistance. This is about gross margin and finance. This is about accepting weeds you can accept and not those you can't. And Ali, I'll hand back to the studio.
Well done, Phil.
Thanks, guys.
Can we have another hour? Can we just no?
In the three of you, I'm sure you could have 4 hours, but the pubs aren't open quite yet for that chat over a pint. Yeah, just want to say thank you. I know that there's been a little bit of issue with my sound, so I hope that's worked its way through. But just thank you so much to everybody who joined us today on this lovely sunny morning. Great questions. And I'm sure you can find Rob, Phil and Mike on Twitter if you want to follow up any additional questions, and please join us for our more our IPM and weed control session which will be happening between 11 and 12 today. So hopefully see some of you very later. So thanks, bye.
Thanks guys, have a good day, bye bye.
That's the end of today's session. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope you found it useful and informative. To find out more and to sign up to take part in any of the live sessions, visit the Arable Weed Week Hub at www.croptecshow.com/Arable Weed Week.